Morning light fell like powdered gold upon the lawns of Ashcombe Hall, softening the edges of grandeur, as though the day itself wished to be gentle. Beneath the white awning of the chapel, 100 guests shimmered in silks and jewels, their laughter like porcelain, fragile, polished, easily broken. Somewhere beyond the murmur of strings and the scent of roses, a young woman waited alone. Lady Evelyn Marwood had not slept. Her eyes, the calm gray of river stone, betrayed nothing of the chaos within her chest. The gown she wore had taken 6 months to craft, French lace, seed pearls, a train long enough to silence envy. Yet, as she looked at her reflection in the gilt mirror, she thought she resembled less a bride than a figure carved for mourning. In another room, her mother fussed with ribbons and lineage. "You must smile, my dear," Lady Marwood insisted, fingers trembling as she adjusted the veil. "The Duke will look to you for composure. Remember, your union restores all." Evelyn nodded, the habit of obedience stronger than any hope. She had been promised to the Duke of Halewell since she was a child, a treaty between fortunes, not hearts. Still, she had cultivated affection from duty, telling herself that steadiness was love by another name. Yet last night, as the final rehearsal ended, she had caught a glance, a flicker, between the Duke and her younger sister Clara, a look so brief it might have been imagined, had it not pierced through her sleep and haunted her dreams. Clara had always been the darling of every room. Sunlight where Evelyn was dusk, laughter where Evelyn was grace. She had returned from finishing school barely 2 months ago, eyes bright with Paris and promise. Evelyn had welcomed her home sincerely. She loved her sister, though sometimes that love was a quiet ache. But this morning, as Clara adjusted a lilac ribbon in her own hair and whispered, "You look divine, Evie," something in Evelyn's heart shifted like a cracked bell. The chapel doors opened. The air inside smelled of lilies and beeswax, of centuries of vows spoken and broken. Evelyn's father took her arm. He said nothing, but his silence was heavy with satisfaction, the kind men wear when bargains are about to be sealed. As she stepped into the aisle, music rose soft and golden. Faces turned, a sea of admiration and envy. The Duke stood before the altar, tall, immaculate, yet strangely pale. His gaze found her, and for an instant it faltered. It was enough. Every step forward became an act of will. The distance between them felt endless, measured in heartbeats and whispered doubts. When she reached him, his hand trembled as he took hers. The priest began the vows, his voice deep as stone, but the Duke's eyes were elsewhere, beyond her past the crowd, where Clara stood among the bridesmaids, clutching her bouquet, too tightly. When the priest spoke the words, "Wilt thou take this woman?" the Duke's breath caught. He looked down at Evelyn as though seeing her for the first time. The silence that followed was so fragile, it seemed even the chandeliers dared not sway. "I cannot." The words fell softly like ash. At first no one moved. A ripple of disbelief passed through the pews. Evelyn's fingers went cold. She felt the tremor of her father's hand tightening around his cane. The Duke turned to the congregation. His voice broke as he spoke. "Forgive me. I cannot marry Lady Evelyn. My heart belongs elsewhere." Gasps, murmurs. A woman fainted near the front. Evelyn's mother rose, pale as marble. The priest stammered, the choir fell silent, and for a long, unending moment, the world was nothing but the sound of petals falling from Clara's trembling hands. Evelyn did not cry. Her body would not permit it. She simply stood, her veil ghosting against her face, as if time itself refused to touch her. Her gaze followed the Duke's, followed it until it rested on Clara, whose lips parted in horrified recognition. It was all the confirmation society required. A whisper slithered through the hall like wind through reeds. The younger sister, the bride supplanted, the Duke's folly, the elder's shame. Evelyn turned without a word. Her father reached for her, but she passed him like mist, her train whispering against the marble floor. Outside, the sunlight burned too bright. Carriages stirred, footmen whispered, and somewhere a bird sang, mocking oblivious. By the time she reached the carriage, tears blurred her sight. Not for the man, never for him, but for the years she had spent preparing to be someone else's future, only to find she had none. The coachman hesitated. "Home, my lady?" Her voice came steady, strange even to her own ears. "Yes, home." The ride back to Marwood Manor was silent, but for the sound of wheels crushing gravel. As the countryside unrolled green fields, hedgerows, the shimmer of summer, the weight of disgrace settled upon her like a second veil. She imagined the gossip already spreading through parlors and drawing rooms. "Did you hear? At the altar, no less." Every sentence would begin with pity and end with relish. At the manor, the servants stood in uneasy lines. Lady Marwood swept in moments later, face pinched and eyes bright with fury. "Do not speak of this," she ordered. "Not to anyone. We shall tell them you were ill, delirious, perhaps." Evelyn said nothing. She went to her room, closed the door, and stood before the mirror once more. The gown, perfect hours ago, now looked ghostly, the lace wilted with sorrow. She began to unlace it slowly, each ribbon a small surrender. When at last she stood in her shift, she looked at her reflection and whispered, "It is done." Days passed. Curtains remained drawn. Newspapers arrived, but were burned unopened. Clara's name began to reappear in conversation, always with careful sympathy, as though she were victim to circumstance rather than cause. The Duke's letters went unanswered, though Evelyn read each one before consigning it to the fire. One evening, a storm rolled in from the hills. Rain tapped at her window, like questions she could not bear to answer. She stepped outside, barefoot, into the garden, roses drenched air thick with the scent of earth. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to feel anger, bright and clean. "How easily they discard what does not glitter," she murmured to the wind. "As though love were a mirror, and I its dull reflection." Thunder replied. Somewhere in the distance, she thought she heard a carriage, a sound she imagined, perhaps, or a memory replaying itself. The next morning a bouquet arrived, pale, white roses tied with a violet ribbon, the color Clara had worn at the altar. No note, no signature, only the faint scent of the Duke's cologne clinging to the petals. Evelyn stared at them a long time before placing them on the windowsill. By afternoon, the blooms began to brown at the edges. She did not move them. Let them fade, she thought. Let them show how swiftly beauty dies when it believes itself eternal. That night, she sat by the fire, the silence thick as velvet. The world beyond her walls continued, dinners, laughter, endless gossip, but here time seemed to pause, as though waiting for her permission to resume. When she finally rose, she crossed to her writing desk and opened a blank sheet of paper. The ink trembled slightly as she wrote the first line. "You have taken my name from the altar, but you shall not take my peace." She paused, the quill hovering. Outside, the rain began again, softer this time, as though urging her on. She folded the note carefully and sealed it, not to send, but to keep, a testament to the words she had never spoken. Somewhere beyond the manor walls, the Duke's wedding to Clara would soon be announced. Bells would ring, toasts would rise, and the world would forget the woman left standing in white. But not entirely. There would be whispers, faint and persistent, of how the elder Marwood daughter never wept, never begged, never spoke ill of anyone. In London, they would call her cold. In Wiltshire, they would call her proud. But in that quiet room, Evelyn Marwood understood the truth. Pride was merely dignity surviving ruin. As the fire dimmed, she placed the sealed note beneath her pillow and lay down. Sleep came at last, uneasy, fragile, but real. Outside, the storm passed, and far off, in the distance between heartbeats and dawn, a carriage wheel turned once more upon the road to Marwood Manor. By late summer, Marwood Manor had begun to wither. The roses, once the envy of Wiltshire, drooped in their beds, unpruned and fading. The shutters stayed half-closed, the mirrors draped in muslin. The house seemed to imitate its mistress, quiet, dignified, and slightly undone. Society, as ever, had moved on. The scandal of the bride left in white had cooled into anecdote, traded over tea and embroidery. In London, the Duke and his new Duchess glittered at soirees. Their portraits appeared in the society columns. In Wiltshire, Lady Evelyn Marwood lived like a ghost among her mother's fading silver. She spent her mornings in the garden, pruning the briar roses with a care that bordered on punishment. Her gloves grew torn, her fingers stained green. And yet she found in the act a strange, bleak solace. When she tired, she would rest on the old marble bench near the sundial, where moss traced the passage of time with more honesty than clocks. Here, she could imagine the world had forgotten her entirely. On one such afternoon, as thunderclouds gathered like bruises across the sky, the sound of hooves broke her solitude. The post had arrived, an event now more feared than welcomed. Her maid brought a single letter, misdirected by the look of it. The seal bore the Duke's crest, but the hand was unfamiliar, firm and slanted. Evelyn hesitated only a moment before breaking it. "My lord," it began, "your debts remain unsettled. You promised restitution upon your return. Yet you continue to gamble while men who served under you go unpaid. Honor dies slower than soldiers, but it dies all the same. I shall call upon you soon to conclude what you owe to them and to me." It was signed Captain Nathaniel Harrow. Evelyn read it twice. There was no tenderness, no courtesy, only truth, sharp and undressed. It startled her. She folded the letter, meaning to send it along to London. Yet, as she reached for the bell, she paused. To forward it would mean assisting the Duke, preserving his reputation once again. The man who had left her to ridicule now risked ruin of his own making. The temptation to let the truth breathe was exquisite, but she could not. Not yet. She burned the letter in the grate, watching the ink curl into smoke. When it was gone, the room felt emptier for it. That night she dreamt of a battlefield, gray smoke, a flag torn by wind, and a man walking through it with eyes that saw too much. She woke with the name Harrow on her lips. The next morning dawned bright, the kind of deceptive sunshine that promised warmth but delivered nothing but glare. Evelyn took her usual walk through the neglected gardens, basket in hand. She had just reached the overgrown archway when she stopped short. A man stood among the roses, his coat dusted with travel, his hat in hand. He was studying the manor with a soldier's stillness, as if measuring its defenses. "This is private property," Evelyn said, more sharply than intended. He turned. The light caught his face, sun-browned, a faint scar at his temple, eyes the uncertain green of deep water. He bowed, not with society's polish, but with quiet respect. "My apologies," he said. "I was told the Duke of Halewell resided here. It seems I was misinformed." Her pulse quickened. "He does not, nor is he welcome." "Then I intrude twice over," he murmured, "once as stranger and once as fool." She studied him, noting the exhaustion that no fine words could conceal. His coat bore the faint scent of gunpowder and rain. "You are Captain Harrow?" His brows lifted. "I am, and you are." "The lady he did not marry," she said evenly. A silence followed, not of discomfort, but of comprehension. He inclined his head slightly, as though acknowledging a truth already known. "Then perhaps I owe you an apology as well, Lady Marwood. My letter was meant for his eyes, not yours. I read it," she said, surprising herself, "and I burned it." He looked at her then, not with pity, but with something keener, something like recognition. "A mercy I did not deserve." "It was not mercy," she replied. "It was caution. I have no interest in further scandal." His mouth quirked. Scandal rarely seeks permission. The wind stirred between them, scattering petals like fragments of speech. Evelyn turned away, unwilling to show that his presence unsettled her. "You should go. My mother will not tolerate trespassers, no matter how gallant." "I'll leave," he said quietly, "once I've given you this." He reached into his coat and produced a small object wrapped in cloth. When she hesitated, he set it on the sundial and stepped back. "It belonged to one of my men. He died at Balaclava under the Duke's command. The insignia bears Halewell's crest. I thought the rightful owner should see what debts were paid in his name." Evelyn unwrapped it. Inside lay a tarnished metal, its ribbon frayed by weather. She closed her fingers around it, feeling the chill of the metal. "You mean to shame him," she said. "I mean to remind him," Harrow replied. "But perhaps shame is the only language he speaks." Before she could answer, thunder cracked above the hills. He inclined his head once more and turned toward the gate, his figure swallowed by the gathering rain. Evelyn watched him until he vanished. Only then did she realize she was still clutching the metal, her pulse thudding like a trapped bird. By evening, the servants whispered. A stranger scene in the garden, Lady Evelyn speaking to him alone. The story swelled before nightfall, reshaped by imagination and envy. When Lady Marwood heard, she demanded explanation. Evelyn met her fury with calm indifference. A messenger lost his way. Nothing more. But the damage was done. 2 days later, a letter arrived from London, a note of concern written in Clara's delicate hand. "We hear rumors, dearest sister, that you entertain company of a rather daring kind. Please, for father's sake, do be prudent." The words dripped with affection like honey masking poison. Evelyn folded it without reply. The metal she kept in her writing desk, hidden beneath the ashwood drawer. She told herself it meant nothing, yet she found her gaze returning to it as if drawn by some invisible tether. It was not the object itself, but the man who had placed it there, the quiet conviction in his eyes, the unpolished decency that made her aware of how hollow her own world had become. A week later, during another storm, she found him again, or perhaps he found her. He stood by the gate, hat in hand, soaked through, but smiling faintly. "I feared the roses might take me hostage," he said. "They seem to guard you like soldiers." She should have dismissed him. Instead, she opened the gate. "You are persistent. Persistence is the soldier's only virtue," he said. He carried no letter this time, only a question. Could she tell him where the Duke now resided? She could have lied, but something in his tone forbade it. She told him of the Halewell townhouse in London, the soirees, the debts. When she finished, he thanked her and turned to go, but then paused. "Lady Marwood," he said, "forgive me if I speak out of turn, but you deserve to be more than a cautionary tale." She stared at him. "And what do you know of deserving?" "Only that the world seldom grants it," he said. When he left, the rain eased. Evelyn remained at the gate long after his figure had faded into the mist. She did not know why her heart beat faster, only that for the first time in months, the silence around her felt alive. 2 days later, the local paper arrived. Her maid left it folded on the tray beside her breakfast. Evelyn opened it absently until her eyes caught a headline buried near the bottom. "Duchess of Halewell appears with mysterious insignia at London Gala." Beneath it, a small engraving, Clara, radiant, wearing the very metal Harrow had left behind. Evelyn's hands trembled. How had it reached her sister? Had someone seen or spoken, or delivered it in malice? She read the paragraph again. A curious token said to be of military origin, worn by her grace in tribute to her husband's service. The room seemed to tilt. The scandal she had feared now bore her sister's smile. Outside, the garden shimmered in rainlight. Evelyn rose, crossing to the window. Far off, at the edge of the orchard, a rider paused on the road, dark coat, gloved hands, watching the manor. Even at this distance, she felt certain it was him. For a long moment, neither moved. Then the rider touched his hat and turned away. The hooves faded into silence, leaving only the echo of possibility. Dangerous, uninvited, and alive, the storm began just after dusk, sweeping across the Wiltshire hills with the fierce insistence of memory. Rain lashed the windows of Marwood Manor, drumming against the glass like an impatient messenger. Evelyn sat in the library, the fire throwing restless shadows along the shelves, each book spine glinting like a watchful eye. She had not read in weeks, the words blurred together, weightless. Instead, she listened to the house settling, to her own heart moving in strange, uncertain rhythms. When the door opened, she thought at first it was the wind, but the figure that stepped from the rain was too deliberate, too solid. Water traced the line of his jaw. His greatcoat dripped onto the carpet. "Forgive the intrusion," said Captain Harrow, his voice low but steady. "I was passing through the village when I heard the roads were flooding. Your lights were the only ones still burning." Evelyn rose slowly. "You mistake my house for a refuge?" "No," he said, eyes fixed on hers. "For a reckoning." The fire cracked. He stepped forward, removing his gloves with measured care. "I owe you an explanation, Lady Marwood, and perhaps an apology. Do you imagine one can replace the other?" "I imagine neither will suffice," he said softly, "but I've come nonetheless." Evelyn gestured toward the hearth. "Then speak, Captain, before the house decides to throw you out itself." He smiled faintly, a glint of self-mockery there. "I sought the Duke to demand justice for my brother. His name was Thomas Harrow. He served under Halewell during the Crimean campaign. When the Duke fled the line, my brother stayed. He was 22. The Duke came home with medals. Thomas came home in a box. You may understand why I mistook revenge for duty." The words hung between them, harsh and bare. Evelyn's throat tightened. "And you believed I might help you destroy him?" "I believed you might still care for him enough to protect him." A bitter laugh escaped her. "Then you have a poor sense of human nature." "I have an excellent one," he replied. "I've seen what loyalty can do to the righteous. It's not always a virtue." She turned away, staring into the flames. "When he left me, the world called it love's misfortune. I called it freedom. And yet here you stand, asking me to become his executioner." Harrow's voice softened. "I ask nothing, only truth. I thought to find in you another mask of society's cruelty. Instead, I find something else." "What do you find?" He hesitated. The storm outside deepened, thunder folding over itself like a restless beast, someone who understands silence too well. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them shimmered with unspoken things. Loss? Pride? The fragile thread of kinship that forms between those who have suffered quietly. Evelyn felt the pull of confession, that dangerous relief of being seen. "I thought dignity was my salvation," she said, "that if I remained still enough, composed enough, the world would forget. But silence became its own prison. Each morning I wake and wonder what face I must wear to be acceptable again." Harrow stepped closer. "And are you?" She met his gaze. "No, but I am alive, which is more than I expected to be." He smiled, sadly, tenderly. "That is the bravest thing I have heard in years." A log collapsed in the hearth, scattering sparks. He turned his palms toward the fire, fingers trembling slightly from the cold. There was a soldier's weariness about him, the kind that never quite sleeps. "Captain," she said, her tone softening, "what will you do now? Confront him? Expose him?" "I thought I might," he admitted, "but then I saw you, and I wondered what vengeance achieves if it breeds only another wound." "Do not make a philosophy of pity," she warned. "It ill suits a man who has lost so much." "Perhaps," he said, "but grief is the only teacher that never lies." He looked at her then, not with the reverence men give beauty, but with the quiet awe reserved for courage. Something in her chest unraveled. She had not realized until that moment how long it had been since anyone looked at her without expectation or pity. "Evelyn," he said suddenly, her name a confession in itself, "forgive the liberty. I have thought of you since the garden. You reminded me that stillness need not mean surrender." She drew in a slow breath. "And you reminded me that truth can walk uninvited and still be welcome." Rain streaked the window panes. The candle nearest her guttered, flame bending in the draught. The intimacy of the moment frightened her. It felt like standing at the edge of something vast and unnamed. He took one step closer. "When I left Balaclava, I swore I would never again beg for understanding. Yet here I am." "Do not," she whispered, "do not make me your absolution." "I don't want absolution," he said, "only honesty." "And if honesty ruins us both, then let ruin be the first honest thing either of us has known." Her lips parted, but no sound came. He reached for her hand, hesitating just long enough for her to pull away. She did not. His touch was warm, calloused, startlingly human. For a heartbeat, the world outside ceased to exist. The rain, the scandal, the years of restraint. "I cannot offer you a future," he said quietly. "Only a moment of truth." She met his gaze, and in it saw not promise but understanding. When he bent his head, the kiss that followed was slow, uncertain, and filled with everything words could not bear. It was not passion, it was recognition, the meeting of two souls who had lived too long in exile. When they parted, she stepped back first, trembling. "You should go," she said. "Yes," he answered, though neither of them moved. At last he bowed, every motion deliberate, as if sealing something sacred. He turned to the door, but before he reached it she spoke again. "Captain," she said, her voice barely above the crackle of the fire, "what did you mean when you said my silence was something else?" He looked back at her, eyes shadowed with what might have been regret. "I meant it was survival, and I have seen too much death to despise survival." Then he was gone, swallowed by rain and darkness. Evelyn stood alone, the fire dimming to embers. The echo of his presence lingered, the warmth of his hand, the scent of storm in his coat. For the first time in months, her heart beat, not with anger or shame, but with ache, a terrible awakening ache. By morning, the house was alive with whispers. A maid, sent to close the shutters, had seen a man depart at midnight. The servants spoke in corners. Her mother's eyes burned with suspicion. At breakfast, no one dared mention it, yet the silence was louder than accusation. Her father summoned her to the study. "This talk of impropriety will not stand," he said coldly. "You will deny everything." Evelyn met his gaze without flinching. "If denial restores your comfort, I shall do so gladly. But I will not call truth a lie for your sake." He slammed his hand against the desk. "You would ruin us?" "I was ruined long before," she said. She left him there, speechless amid his pride. In her room, a sealed envelope lay upon the writing desk. She recognized the hand immediately, firm, slanted, unmistakably his. Her pulse quickened as she broke the seal. "Evelyn," it read, "forgive my haste. I leave for London to face the Duke. There are debts no man can outrun, and truth will have its witness. Whatever follows, remember this. You are not the echo of another's failure. You are the sound itself." Beneath the signature, something small gleamed. A pressed violet, fragile but uncrushed. She touched it lightly, her eyes stinging with unbidden tears. Outside, the rain had ceased, sunlight filtered through the clouds like a hesitant promise. But peace would not come so easily. Before noon, a carriage approached the manor. When she descended the stairs, she found Clara standing in the hall, pale, trembling, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. Evelyn, her sister, whispered, clutching her gloved hands together, "I need your help. The Duke, he's ruined. His creditors are everywhere. They'll destroy us both if you don't." Evelyn's hand tightened on the letter still hidden in her sleeve. The air between them crackled with a history too heavy for words. At last she spoke, her voice calm and measured. "You've come to the wrong savior, Clara. The man you chose is the one I escaped." And yet, as thunder murmured once more beyond the hills, she felt a strange chill in her blood, a sense that this was only the beginning, and that truth, once awakened, would not sleep again. Dawn came pale and uncertain, spilling its first light across the windows of Marwood Manor like an uninvited truth. Evelyn stood at her chamber window, the violet from Captain Harrow's letter still pressed between her fingers. Its faint scent clung to her skin, mingling with the chill of the morning. The storm had passed, but its echo remained, a weight in the air, in her blood, in the silence of the house that seemed to hold its breath. Below, the carriage waited, its wheels mired in mud from a night's rain. She watched it sway slightly in the wind, like a promise uncertain of its direction. Harrow had gone to London to confront the Duke, and she could no longer remain where everything was half true, half lived. The house had turned against her. Servants' glances followed her through corridors once warm with familiarity. Her father had locked himself in the study, emerging only to send word that her presence would not be required at dinner. Clara was gone, fled before dawn to join her husband in London. The quiet that remained was unbearable. the kind that hums beneath the skin until something inside must either break or be born anew. She dressed deliberately, choosing a simple gown of dove-gray silk and a dark cloak that brushed the floor. From her drawer she took the violet again and slipped it into her bodice, close to her heart. Then she went to the stables. The groom, startled by her appearance, fumbled with the reins. "Milady, your father." "My father has said nothing that concerns me," she interrupted. "Saddle Aster. Quickly." The ride to London took most of the day. By afternoon the clouds gathered once more, heavy and low, turning the air to damp metal. When the city finally rose before her, gray stone, chimneys, 1,000 restless carriages, it seemed less a place than a judgment. She found Harrow at a modest lodging near Chancery Lane. The landlady hesitated when she asked for him, uncertain whether to admit a woman alone. But Evelyn's gaze was cold and unwavering, and the woman, after a muttered prayer, stepped aside. He was seated by the window when she entered, a letter open in his hands, the light from the street spilling over his shoulders. He turned, startled. "Evelyn." "You said you would face him," she said, breath trembling from a long ride. "Did you mean to do so alone? I never meant to draw you into this. You already have." She moved closer, removing her gloves one finger at a time. "What have you learned?" He hesitated. "The Duke is ruined. His debts are no secret now. The War Office has turned its back on him. But that is not justice. That is decay." "Then what would justice be?" "The truth," he said simply, "to speak it aloud before the men who once praised him, to show them the coward they crowned." "And you think that will restore your brother?" He looked away. "No, but it may restore something of me." She studied him, the line of his jaw, the exhaustion carved deep in his face. "And of me. Captain, what will this truth restore?" He turned back to her. "Whatever he took from you when he left you standing before the world in white." For a moment she could not breathe. Then she said, "If I help you, there will be no return. My father will disown me, and society will not forgive a woman who speaks against a duke. I ask nothing that costs you peace. Peace is not something I possess." He held her gaze. "Then what is it you do possess, Evelyn?" She stepped closer until their reflections blurred in the windowpane. "A name, and the courage to lose it." A faint smile touched his lips, sad, reverent. "Then we are both already free." The hearing was set for the next morning. It was to be a private inquiry among members of the regiment, though word had spread quickly. London thrived on scandal, and whispers moved through drawing rooms like perfume. Evelyn did not return to Marwood Manor. She stayed the night in a small inn off Fleet Street, the sheets coarse, the walls thin. Sleep refused her. Her mind burned with images of the ballroom years ago, the glittering crowd, the hush when the Duke failed to appear, the murmur of pity disguised as admiration. Now the world would murmur again, but for a different reason. At dawn she dressed in black, her veil drawn low. When she arrived at the hall, she found Harrow already there, his uniform pressed, his expression a mixture of resolve and quiet dread. The officers assembled spoke, in low voices, some glancing at her, others pretending not to see. At the far end sat the Duke of Halewell, older, heavier, but still possessing that cruel grace that had once undone her. He did not rise when she entered. "Lady Marwood," he said, his tone edged with disbelief. "Surely there has been some mistake." "No mistake," she said, her voice steady. "I am here as witness." His smile flickered, then vanished. "You disgrace yourself. I have lived long enough in disgrace that truth cannot worsen it." The room fell silent. Harrow stepped forward, unfolding a small packet of letters, dispatches written in the Duke's own hand. "These orders," he said, "condemned my brother and 30 men to die, while their commander retreated to safety." He falsified the report to ensure his honor remained untarnished. Halewell's face darkened. "You dare accuse a peer of the realm?" "I dare speak for those who can no longer speak." Evelyn's pulse pounded. She could feel every pair of eyes upon her, could hear her own heartbeat in her throat. Halewell turned to her, contempt twisting his features. And you, my dear, will you swear before these men that what he says is true? Will you stake your family's name on the word of a disgraced soldier? She lifted her veil. I will stake what remains of myself. Her voice was low, but clear. I was there when he returned from the Crimea. He told me of the charge of the glory, but he wept in his sleep, calling for mercy. I saw the orders in his hand before he burned them. I asked him once what it meant, and he said, "Let the dead remain obedient." I did not understand until Captain Harrow showed me his brother's name among them. Gasps rippled through the room. Halewell rose, fury igniting his face. You would destroy me because I refused to marry you. Is that your vengeance? Evelyn stood tall. You destroyed yourself when you believed cowardice could be hidden behind silk and ceremony. He lunged forward, but 2 officers restrained him. Harrow's hand hovered near his sword, but he did not draw it. The chairman of the inquiry, an older colonel with weary eyes, stood. This will go to the War Office. The evidence is sufficient. You, Duke, are relieved of all rank and privilege pending further judgment. Halewell stared at them all with the blankness of a man who has glimpsed the end. His gaze settled once more on Evelyn. You think yourself free now? You will walk this world as a scandal, a fallen woman clinging to righteousness. She met his eyes and whispered, "Then let me fall standing." When it was over, Harrow escorted her into the rain. Neither spoke until they reached the edge of the square. London moved around them, indifferent, gray, alive. He stopped beside her. You have done what few would dare. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. And you? Will this bring you peace? He shook his head. Peace is not for the living. But truth, that is enough. They stood there for a moment, the wind tugging at her veil, the violet pressed against her heart. She felt the weight of exhaustion, but also a strange lightness, as though something long buried had finally risen to the surface. Where will you go now? She asked. There is a posting in Edinburgh, he said. A quieter duty, perhaps even an honest one. And you? I do not yet know. The manor no longer feels like home. Perhaps I shall find one elsewhere. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small envelope. Then take this. I meant to send it before, but the storm arrived sooner than courage. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet bearing a short note in his steady hand. If ever the world grows silent again, let the wind remind you that it still speaks your name. Beneath it, another violet, fresher than the first. She smiled faintly. You have a poet's heart for a soldier. I have only borrowed courage from those who gave it to me, he said. The rain deepened, scattering light across the cobblestones. For a moment she considered asking him to stay, but the words caught in her throat. Some loves, she realized, are not meant to be possessed, only understood. When they parted, there was no farewell, only the lingering echo of shared defiance. Evelyn returned to Wiltshire weeks later. The house was quieter, her father absent, her mother resigned to silence. The servants no longer whispered, only watched her with cautious respect. Word of the Duke's disgrace had spread. London had found new gossip, but Marwood had not forgotten. She spent her days in the garden once more, pruning the roses left untended, walking the narrow paths where the air smelled of rain and memory. Each morning she found herself pausing beneath the elm where she had first met Harrow, where truth had first begun to breathe again. Spring came, tentative and green. The war was over, at least for others, but within her there remained that quiet ache, a remembrance not of pain, but of purpose. One afternoon, as sunlight fell through the trees, a carriage approached along the lane. The driver bore no crest, the wheels no finery. When it stopped, a boy stepped down and handed her a folded letter sealed in wax. The handwriting was unmistakable. Evelyn, it began. I have seen the sea again and thought of the garden. The world still judges as it always has, but I find that I care little for its verdict. I owe you more than gratitude. You taught me that truth does not require witnesses, only those who dare to live it. Should you ever wish to leave the past behind entirely, there is a cottage on the coast of Devon, small but certain. The key is enclosed. Whether you come or not, know this. I am already yours in the silence that follows courage. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the final slip of paper. A key, worn smooth, fell into her palm. She closed her fingers around it, the metal cool against her skin. For a long while she stood there, listening to the wind threading through the trees. It carried the scent of lilac, of freedom, of something yet unspoken. That evening, as the last light faded, Evelyn packed a small trunk. She left no note, no farewell, only the violet, pressed between the pages of her Bible, resting upon her father's desk, a final kindness, or perhaps a declaration. When she stepped outside, the sky was violet, the horizon trembling with rain. The carriage waited once more, wheels ready, horses restless. She climbed in without hesitation. As the manor vanished behind her, she did not look back. The wind rose, cool and salt-sweet from the west, and she let it touch her face like a benediction. For the first time, she felt no shame, no fear, only the fierce, steady rhythm of her own heart, carrying her toward whatever truth still waited beyond the sea. And somewhere in the gathering dusk, unseen but certain, a violet petal lifted in the wind, borne away unbroken.